I never expected that a can of paint would dismantle my life. To be fair, it was several cans of paint, a specific shade called Silent Horizon, a gray so muted it was almost white, chosen to make my bedroom an even quieter sanctuary than it already was. My life was built on quiet sanctuaries. My apartment was the primary one, a fortress of solitude where every book was alphabetized and every surface was clear. My job as a graphic designer was another, a world of pixels and vectors I could control with absolute precision. I had constructed a life of meticulous order, a series of carefully mortared walls to keep the unpredictable messiness of the world and other people at a safe, observable distance. Then Julian arrived, carrying drop cloths and the scent of turpentine, and the first hairline crack appeared in my foundation. He worked for the building management's preferred contractor, a ghost I'd heard for weeks, his low voice echoing faintly in the hallway as he renovated the apartment down the hall. I had built a vague image of him from those sounds, a steady, unhurried presence. But the reality of him, standing in my doorway, was something my imagination had failed to architect. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire frame, and a dusting of drywall dust in his dark hair like a faint halo. His hands, resting on a stack of paint trays, were large and capable, with paint permanently embedded under his fingernails. He wasn't handsome in the polished, symmetrical way of the men in the magazines I designed layouts for. His was a beauty of substance, of solid lines and worn-in strength. It was the kind of beauty you could lean against. "Leo?" he asked, and his voice was exactly as I'd heard it through the walls, a low, calm rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. It was a voice that sounded like it knew how to fix things. I just nodded, my own voice suddenly feeling like a flimsy, unreliable thing. I stepped back to let him in, and he brought with him the scent of the outside world, of cool morning air and something else, something clean and personal, like soap. He moved with a quiet economy, spreading his drop cloths with practiced snaps of his wrists, lining up his cans and brushes with a precision that my orderly soul deeply appreciated. He was a disruption, an invasion of my space, but he was a neat and tidy one. That, I told myself, was why I found myself watching him. It was a professional appreciation for his craft. That was the first lie I told myself. It would not be the last. The barrier between us was clear, professionally, and, I assumed, personally. He was the painter. I was the client. An impassable gulf. One afternoon, he took a phone call in the hall, and through the open door, I heard him say, "No, I can't tonight. I promised my partner I'd help with the garden." The word hung in the air. Partner. My mind, a relentless architect of doomed scenarios, immediately sketched her out. Her name was probably Sarah or Jessica. She probably had a bright, easy smile and wore comfortable sweaters. They probably had a dog. The image was so complete, so mundane in its perfection, that it cemented him firmly in the category of unattainable. He became a museum piece, a sculpture of quiet, masculine competence that I could admire from behind a velvet rope, but never, ever touch. So I watched. From the safety of my living room, pretending to work on my laptop, I observed the secret rituals of his job. I learned the rhythm of his sanding, a steady, abrasive whisper that became the soundtrack to my day. I learned the way he'd chew on his lower lip when cutting in the edges around the window frame, his focus so absolute, it was a tangible thing in the room. I learned the specific shade of blue of his worn-out work jeans and the way his gray t-shirt stretched across his back when he reached for the ceiling. He had a small tattoo of a compass rose on his inner forearm, mostly faded, that I only saw when he rolled up his sleeves. I found myself cataloging these details like a secret archivist, storing them away in a hidden wing of my mind. It was a silent, one-sided intimacy, a harmless fascination with the man who was painting my walls the color of nothing. I told myself it was just loneliness, a simple yearning for connection that had fixated on the nearest available object. He was just a man doing a job, a kind man, a handsome man, but a stranger. The walls of my life were high and strong for a reason. They kept me safe. They kept me from this exact feeling, this quiet, persistent ache that had taken root in my chest and was beginning to feel dangerously like hope. I ignored it, pushing it down, focusing instead on the clean, straight lines he was painting on my walls, a reflection of the order I so desperately craved. The irony was lost on me then. He was reinforcing my sanctuary, making its walls even cleaner and more perfect, while simultaneously, with his quiet presence, he was getting ready to tear them all down. The storm arrived without fanfare, a subtle darkening of the sky that I barely noticed from my screen-lit living room. It began as a whisper of rain against the glass, a gentle patter that was almost soothing. Julian had been packing up, the clean lines of his work finished for the day, the scent of fresh paint thick and cloying in the air. He moved with the same unhurried grace, cleaning his brushes at the utility sink, his broad back to me. The low hum of the small radio he brought with him was drowned out by a sudden, violent gust of wind that rattled the window frames. We both looked up. The sky had turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple. The gentle patter became a roar, a solid sheet of water hitting the building with the force of a tidal wave. Then came the flicker. The lights buzzed, dimmed, and then surged back to life. A low, ominous groan echoed from the street below. "That doesn't sound good," Julian murmured, his voice a low counterpoint to the storm's fury. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the window, peering down. I came to stand a few feet behind him, my own anxiety a cold knot in my stomach. The world outside had vanished into a gray, churning chaos. Streetlights were blurry halos, and the wind was whipping the trees into a frenzy. "Looks like a branch came down," he said, his voice tight. "A big one. Right across the road." My heart did a strange, stuttering thing in my chest. He was supposed to leave. The routine was, he packs up, he leaves, my apartment returns to being mine and mine alone. The silence would descend, and I would be safe within my walls, left with only the ghost of his presence and the lingering smell of paint. But the storm was a variable I hadn't accounted for. It was chaos. It was the world, in all its messy unpredictability, refusing to be kept out. He pulled out his phone, his brow furrowed. No service. And the transit authority site isn't loading. He tried to make a call, then shook his head, a frustrated sigh escaping his lips. Nothing's going through. I think the whole system is down. He was stranded. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The carefully drawn line between us, client and contractor, observer and observed, was being washed away by the rain. We were just two people, trapped in a box, 60 feet above a flooding city. The professional context had evaporated, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place. You can stay," I heard myself say. The words felt foreign in my mouth, clumsy and heavy. "Until it passes. It's not safe to go out there." He turned from the window, and for the first time, he looked unsure. The quiet confidence I had admired from a distance was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that made him seem younger. He ran a hand through his damp hair, scattering little flecks of drywall dust. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "It's a hurricane, or something close to it. The couch is comfortable." This was a lie. The couch was a stylish, minimalist monstrosity I'd bought for its aesthetic, not for comfort. But it was an anchor, a piece of normalcy in a situation that was anything but. He hesitated for a long moment. The silence between us stretched thin, filled only by the howl of the wind. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to get home warring with the simple, practical reality of his situation. Finally, he gave a small, resigned nod. "Okay, thank you. Just until it lets up." And just like that, the rules changed. He was no longer the painter. He was a guest. He was a man sharing my space, my air, my silence. My fortress had been breached, not by force, but by a simple act of nature and a few hesitant words. The quiet sanctuary of my apartment suddenly felt very, very small, and every inch of it was charged with his presence. The storm was raging outside, but the real tempest was just beginning, right here inside my carefully ordered world. The transition from a work site to a shared refuge was profoundly awkward. Julian, stripped of his tools and his purpose, seemed adrift in my living room. He stood by the window for a long time, a solid silhouette against the flashing, rain-streaked glass, while I hovered in the kitchen, pretending to be busy. The silence, which I usually cherished, was now a heavy blanket, thick with unspoken questions. My apartment, my meticulously curated space, felt alien. It was no longer just mine. It was ours, for now, and the air hummed with a strange, nervous energy. I decided to do something normal. Something human. Are you hungry? I asked, my voice sounding unnaturally loud. I can make something. He turned, a look of surprise on his face as if he'd forgotten I was there. Oh, you don't have to do that. It's fine. I was going to eat anyway. Another lie. My usual dinner was a joyless protein bar eaten while scrolling through design blogs. I have pasta. He gave a small, grateful smile that transformed his entire face, softening the rugged lines around his eyes. Pasta sounds great. Thank you, Leo. The sound of my own name from his lips was a small shock. He'd said it before, of course, but this time it felt different. It was personal. It was the name of a person, not a client on an invoice. In the kitchen, my movements were clumsy. I, who could align pixels to a fraction of a millimeter, suddenly couldn't manage a simple box of spaghetti. I dropped the lid to the pot with a clatter that made us both jump. My hands trembled as I chopped garlic, the pungent, earthy scent filling the small space. He eventually drifted over, drawn by the activity, and leaned against the doorframe, watching me. It was an inversion of our usual dynamic. Now he was the observer. I felt his gaze on my back, on my hands, and I was acutely aware of every flaw, every nervous tremor. Can I help? He asked, his voice that low, steadying rumble. It's okay. I've got it. I was a master of self-sufficiency. I didn't know how to accept help. He didn't press. He just stayed there, a quiet, reassuring presence in the doorway. My sanctuary had been invaded, but I was surprised to find that the invasion wasn't entirely unwelcome. The space, usually so empty and silent, felt populated. His scent, a mix of rain-damp clothes, soap, and the faint, sweet smell of drying paint, had permeated the air, overriding the sterile nothingness I usually maintained. It was the scent of life, of another human being, and my starved senses drank it in. We ate sitting on the floor, using my coffee table as a makeshift dining table because my actual dining table was covered in neat stacks of design magazines. The storm provided a constant, chaotic soundtrack. As we ate, the awkwardness began to meld away, replaced by a tentative curiosity. We talked about small things, bad clients, the ridiculous price of coffee, the surprising number of good dogs in our neighborhood. The conversation was mundane, but it felt monumental. It was a bridge being built across the chasm that had separated us. Then, during a lull in the wind, he looked down at his plate, a shadow passing over his features. This is nice, he said quietly. It's been a while since I just sat and had dinner with someone. There it was, a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the man behind the competent painter. I seized on it, tentatively. The partner you mentioned? The one with the garden. He was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of his plate with his fork. Mark, he said, the name soft. He was my partner. We split up a few months ago. He kept the house. And the garden. He looked up at me, his eyes holding a deep, wistful sadness that took my breath away. I'm still getting used to the quiet. The name hit me like a physical blow. Mark. Not Sarah. Not Jessica. Mark. The entire, elaborate fantasy I had constructed, the picket fence, the comfortable sweaters, the dog, it all dissolved into dust. The barrier I had so carefully erected, the one labeled unattainable, crumbled into nothing. He wasn't just a museum piece. He was possible. And that single possibility was more terrifying than any storm. He was a man who understood quiet. He was a man who was lonely. He was a man just like me. The revelation hung in the air between us, charged and alive. He had offered me a piece of his vulnerability, a shard of his real, messy life. And in doing so, he had unknowingly invited me to step off the viewing platform, to cross the velvet rope. The small, significant act of sharing a meal had become something else entirely. It had become a confession. And as the lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face, I felt a profound and terrifying shift inside me. The quiet admiration I had harbored was no longer quiet. It was a roar, as loud and as wild as the storm itself. The power died with a soft, final sigh. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint buzz of the digital clock, the ambient light from the street, it all vanished, plunging the apartment into a profound, disorienting darkness. The only light came from the storm itself, strobing flashes of lightning that threw the room into stark, momentary relief, followed by an even deeper blackness. The roar of the rain and wind seemed to amplify, rushing in to fill the sudden electronic silence. "Well?" Julian's voice came from across the room, startlingly close in the dark. "I guess that settles that." My heart was hammering against my ribs. The darkness felt like a blanket, intimate and suffocating all at once. It erased the familiar landscape of my apartment, of my life, leaving only the two of us, two disembodied voices, two warm bodies breathing in the same charged air. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a blinding rectangle of light that made me squint. I found the flashlight function, the thin beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. It landed on him, and he raised a hand to shield his eyes. "Sorry," I mumbled, directing the light at the ceiling. We existed in this strange, liminal space for a few moments, the silence stretching. The couch, my earlier, flimsy offer, seemed like a ridiculous proposition now. The thought of him, a man of his size and substance, trying to sleep on that piece of aesthetic furniture was absurd. The thought of him being uncomfortable in my home because of me was worse. "You should take the bed," I said, the words coming out in a rush. It's a king. I can take the couch. I'm fine." "No," he said immediately, his voice firm in the dark. "Absolutely not. It's your apartment, your bed. I'll be fine right here." The beam of my phone's flashlight shook in my hand. "It's not fine. You're 6'3", and that couch is a glorified bench. You won't sleep a wink." Another flash of lightning illuminated his face. He was smiling, a faint, amused quirk of his lips. "We could share," he suggested, his voice dropping a little, losing its definitive edge and taking on a tentative, questioning quality. "Like you said, it's a king. There's plenty of room." The air crackled. The storm outside had nothing on the one brewing in my chest. Sharing a bed. The idea was so far beyond the realm of what I had ever allowed myself to imagine that my brain simply stalled. It was a domestic, intimate act, an act of trust and proximity that I hadn't experienced in years. My silence was my answer. I couldn't form a word, so I just gave a jerky nod that he probably couldn't even see. I led the way to the bedroom, the narrow beam of light dancing ahead of us. The room smelled strongly of fresh paint, of this silent horizon he had so carefully applied. It was a monument to my desire for quiet, for solitude. And now I was inviting the source of all my internal chaos into its very center. We moved around each other in the dark, a clumsy, silent ballet of shadows. I gave him a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants to sleep in, our fingers brushing as I passed them to him. The contact was electric, a jolt of heat that shot up my arm. I could hear the rustle of his clothes as he changed, the soft thud of his boots on the floor. I changed quickly, my back to him, my skin prickling with a hyper-awareness of his presence. We got into the bed from opposite sides, the mattress dipping under his weight. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. I lay on my side, facing away from him, my body rigid, my breathing shallow. I could feel the heat radiating from him across the sheets. I could hear the soft sound of his own breathing, deeper and steadier than mine. The darkness was absolute, erasing everything but sensation. The cool sheets, the warm presence beside me, the scent of him, of soap and rain and man, now clinging to the fabric of my own clothes. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Neither of us moved. The silence was deafening. Then, his voice, a low whisper that cut through the noise of the storm. "Leo?" "Yeah." My voice was a croak. He shifted, the mattress moving with him. I felt him turn to face my back. "Are you okay?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to lie and say I was fine, that this was normal. But I couldn't. I just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. He must have felt it, or sensed it. A long moment passed. Then, I felt a tentative warmth on my shoulder. His hand. It rested there, a solid, grounding weight. He didn't say anything. He just left it there, a silent question. Slowly, I turned over to face him. In the gloom, I could just make out the shape of him, a darker shadow against the dark. His hand moved from my shoulder, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. It was the most tender, deliberate touch I had ever felt. My carefully constructed world, my entire fortress of solitude, shattered into a million pieces. He leaned in, his movement achingly slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned in, too, closing the last inch of space between us. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle press against mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of discovery, of question and answer. It tasted of rain and coffee and a deep, profound relief. It felt like the storm outside had finally found its way inside, not as a destructive force, but as a cleansing, life-giving rain. And in that moment, in the dark, with the world raging outside, I let myself be swept away. The morning arrived with a cruel, clinical brightness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and unnaturally sharp. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and throwing every detail of the room into stark relief. The intimacy of the darkness had been a mirage, and the light was a harsh return to reality. I woke up first. Julian was still asleep, lying on his back, one arm flung over his head. In the daylight, he looked different, younger, more vulnerable. The strong, capable lines of his face were softened in sleep. A faint stubble shadowed his jaw. My t-shirt looked small on him, stretched taut across his chest. The sight of him in my bed, wearing my clothes, was so intensely domestic, so profoundly real, that a wave of panic washed over me. What had I done? The kiss, the closeness, the feeling of his hand in mine as we finally drifted off to sleep. It had all felt so right in the cocoon of the storm. But now, in the cold light of day, it felt like a dream, a dangerous fantasy I had allowed to bleed into the real world. He was my painter. I was his client. There were rules. There were boundaries. And I had obliterated them. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my feet cold on the hardwood floor. I moved through my apartment like a thief, my own home suddenly feeling like a stranger's. The air was thick with a new kind of silence, not the comfortable solitude I was used to, but a heavy, awkward silence, pregnant with the unspoken events of the night before. I made coffee, my hands shaking so badly I spilled grounds all over the counter. The simple, routine act felt like a monumental effort. Every sound, the click of the coffee maker, the scrape of a mug on the counter, seemed deafeningly loud. When he finally emerged from the bedroom, the tension in the room became unbearable. He was dressed in his work clothes from the day before, now rumpled and creased. He didn't look at me, focusing instead on rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. "Morning," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice thin. "Coffee's ready." He poured himself a mug, his back to me. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, a chasm of granite and regret between us. He took a sip of coffee, staring out the window at the clean, bright day. He seemed a million miles away. The easy camaraderie of the previous evening, the vulnerable confession, the tentative intimacy, it was all gone, replaced by this stiff, polite distance. My mind, my greatest tormentor, began its relentless spiral. He regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. It was a fluke, a moment of weakness brought on by the storm, the darkness, the confinement. He was probably embarrassed. He probably thought I was some pathetic, lonely client who had taken advantage of the situation. I had misread everything. The sadness over his ex, the gentle touch, the searching kiss. I had projected my own desperate yearning onto him and created a fantasy. Now I had to face the consequences, this excruciating, polite withdrawal. I had not only made a fool of myself, but I had also likely ruined the simple, pleasant professional relationship we had. He would finish the job as quickly as possible, and then I would never see him again, except in my own mortifying memories. "The branch is gone," he said, his voice flat, still looking out the window. "Looks like the city crews were out early." "That's good," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "That's good. You can leave now." The thought was a spike of ice in my gut. He finished his coffee in 2 quick gulps and rinsed the mug in the sink, the movements precise and efficient. He was back in work mode. He was the painter again. "I should be able to finish up here in a couple of hours," he said, finally turning to face me. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They were fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. "Then I'll be out of your hair." Out of my hair. The phrase was so casual, so dismissive. It was confirmation of all my fears. Last night was an anomaly, an inconvenience he was now eager to rectify. The emotional chasm between us felt wider and more impassable than ever before. He was already rebuilding the walls, and I was left standing in the rubble of my own, wondering how I could have been so stupid as to believe for even one night, that they could ever come down for good. He worked with a silent, focused intensity that was agonizing to witness. The easy rhythm I had once admired now felt like a rebuke. The scrape of his putty knife, the whisper of the roller on the wall. Every sound was a tick of the clock, counting down the moments until he would be gone from my life forever. I retreated to my living room, hiding behind the shield of my laptop, but I couldn't focus. My screen was a meaningless blur of colors. My entire being was attuned to the man in the next room, to the growing distance between us. He finished the final wall, the last stroke of Silent Horizon laid down with an air of finality. The room was perfect, sterile, and quiet once more. He began cleaning up, packing his tools with the same brisk efficiency he'd displayed all morning. The soft clatter of his brushes being cleaned, the snap of his toolbox closing. Each sound was a small death. This was it. He was leaving. He carried his things to the front door, lining them up neatly in the hallway. I stood, my legs feeling weak, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I had to say something. Thank you. Here is your payment. It was nice to meet you. The professional script was there, ready for me to perform, but the words wouldn't come. He wiped his hands on his jeans and turned to face me. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of polite neutrality. My anxiety reached a fever pitch. This was the moment of the awkward handshake, the final, polite dismissal. But he didn't move toward me. He just stood there by the door, his hand resting on the knob, his gaze finally meeting mine. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, a flicker of something, indecision, fear, in his eyes. I braced myself. Leo, he said, his voice low and tight. We should talk about last night. My blood ran cold. This was it. The talk. The let's pretend it never happened speech. The gentle letdown. The confirmation of my deepest fears. I could only manage a small, pathetic nod, my throat too tight to speak. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and the sound seemed to fill the entire apartment. He let go of the doorknob and took a step away from the door, a step toward me. I've been an idiot all morning, he said, his voice raw. I woke up, and the sun was out, and everything was real, and it scared the hell out of me. I stared at him, unable to process his words. This was not the script I had written in my head. I don't do things like that, he continued, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I was beginning to recognize as a sign of his own anxiety. I don't get involved with clients. I don't let things get messy. After Mark, I built up all these rules. To keep things simple. To keep from getting hurt again. He looked at me, his gaze direct and intense, and I saw the vulnerability from the night before return, raw and unguarded. And then I met you. My breath hitched. I noticed you weeks ago, when I was working on 3B. I'd see you in the lobby. You have this quiet way about you. Like you're watching everything. I wanted to talk to you, but I didn't know how. And then I got this job, in your apartment, and it felt like, I don't know, a sign, or something. He gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. I felt like a teenager with a crush. I almost turned down the job because I didn't think I could be around you and stay professional. He took another step closer. Last night wasn't a mistake, Leo. It wasn't the storm. It was me, wanting something I've been too scared to want for a very long time. This morning, I panicked. I went back to my rules, to my walls. I thought it was the safe thing to do, but it just felt wrong. It felt dishonest. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. The only thing I regret about last night is how I acted this morning. The dam inside me broke. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming. It felt like I might collapse. All the anxiety, the fear, the self-recrimination that had been poisoning me all morning, it all washed away, leaving behind a fragile, trembling hope. I thought you regretted it. I whispered, the words clumsy and thick with emotion. I thought I'd imagined everything. I thought, my voice broke. He closed the remaining distance between us in a single stride. He cupped my face in his large, warm, paint-splattered hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. You didn't imagine a thing, he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. I've been falling for the quiet guy in 5A since the day I first saw him. And then he kissed me. It was nothing like the first kiss in the dark. There was no hesitation, no question. This kiss was a statement. It was a confirmation. It was sure and deep and hungry, full of all the words we hadn't said, all the fear and relief of the last 12 hours. It was the kiss of a man who knew what he wanted, and what he wanted was me. It wasn't about a storm or a shared space. It was about connection. It felt like every wall I had ever built had crumbled to dust around my feet. It felt like I was finally, truly home. He didn't leave. His tools sat by the door, forgotten. The newly painted bedroom, the catalyst for everything, stood empty and silent. We didn't go in there. Instead, we gravitated back to the living room, to the coffee table where we'd shared a meal that felt like a lifetime ago. We ordered takeout from the Thai place down the street, and as we waited, we sat on the couch, the uncomfortable, stylish couch, and we simply existed in the new reality we had just created. It was a delicate, fragile thing, this new beginning. The silence that fell between us was different now. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of the morning, nor the charged, anticipatory silence of the night before. It was a comfortable, easy silence, punctuated by small, reassuring touches. His knee pressed against mine, his arm draped along the back of the sofa, his fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder. Each touch was a quiet affirmation, a reinforcement of the truth we had finally spoken aloud. We talked for hours. We unspooled the stories of our lives, the real ones, not the edited versions one presents to strangers. He told me about Mark, about the slow, painful erosion of their decade-long relationship, about the suffocating loneliness of living in a house that was no longer a home. He spoke of his love for his work, the simple satisfaction of transforming a space with his hands, of bringing color and life to empty rooms. He talked about his own walls, the ones he'd built not of order and routine like mine, but of self-reliance and emotional distance. I, in turn, told him about my own quiet life, about the safety I found in solitude, and the profound loneliness that was its price. I told him about my work, about the frustration of creating perfect, beautiful things on a screen that felt cold and intangible. I confessed that I had watched him for weeks, that I had been drawn to his grounded, physical presence, a perfect counterbalance to my own cerebral, anxious nature. The words, which had been locked away for so long, came easily now, tumbling out in a rush of relief. He listened, his gaze never leaving my face, his expression one of deep, empathetic understanding. He didn't just hear me, he saw me. The next few days were a study in gentle integration. He had to go back to his own apartment, a small, sparse place he was renting temporarily, to get clothes, to check on his own life. But he always came back. He'd arrive in the evening with groceries, or a bottle of wine, and the scent of him, of soap and sawdust and the cool evening air, would once again fill my space. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, began to transform. A second toothbrush appeared in my bathroom holder. A pair of his worn-out boots sat by my door. My sterile, quiet sanctuary was slowly, beautifully, becoming a home. He insisted on finishing the job properly, on his own time. So he spent the next weekend in my apartment, not as a contractor, but as something more. The work was different now. It was punctuated by long breaks, by lazy mornings in bed, by shared lunches on the floor. I'd watch him paint, but now there was no barrier, no velvet rope. I could walk up behind him, wrap my arms around his waist, and press my cheek against the warm, solid expanse of his back. He would pause, leaning into my touch, and the scent of fresh paint would mingle with the scent of his skin, creating a new fragrance that I knew would forever be the smell of happiness. One afternoon, as he was packing away his tools for the final time, a playful glint appeared in his eye. He wiped a tiny smudge of silent horizon on my nose. "So," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. "About my final payment." He leaned in and kissed me, slow and deep. I laughed against his lips, a real, uninhibited laugh that felt like it came from a stranger. "I don't know," I teased, pulling back slightly. "I think that corner over there might need another coat. You might have to stay a while longer to get it just right." "Is that so?" he murmured, his smile widening. "In that case, we might need to pick a new color for this room, too. Something a little warmer." Maybe he looked around my living room, at the stark white walls that had for so long been a reflection of my inner life. "We could choose it together." Together. The word settled into my heart, warm and solid. It was a word I had long since excised from my vocabulary, a concept I believed was not meant for me. But here it was, offered so easily, so naturally. I looked from his warm, hopeful face to the walls of my apartment. They no longer felt like fortifications. They were just walls. They were a blank canvas. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of the chaos of color. I wasn't afraid of letting someone else hold the brush. The storm had passed, and it had washed everything clean, leaving behind a quiet horizon that was no longer silent, but filled with the promise of a shared and vibrant future. I had spent years building a life of perfect, empty order, only to discover that true sanctuary wasn't a place at all. It was a person, and he was standing right here, ready to paint the world with me.